My wife cheated on me with her boss, and now he's claiming he owns half our house and $250, $0 from our savings. I just found out she's been lying about everything for years. I never thought I'd be the guy sitting here, writing about how my wife, Lisa, turned out to be nothing like I thought she was. It all started with little things, her changing habits, secretive phone calls, late nights that she'd brush off with a smirk and a "it's work, John. You know how demanding my boss is." I bought it at first. Lisa's a good liar when she wants to be, and she's always been pretty good at hiding her true self behind that bitchy smile. But then I started noticing the inconsistencies, the little cracks in her stories that didn't add up. It was about 2 months ago when I first found out something was off. She'd been acting weird, more distant. She'd come home late, smell like perfume I didn't recognize, and she'd be quick to dismiss my questions with a sharp tone. One night I was scrolling through her phone while she was in the shower. Small mistake, I know, but I was desperate to understand what was going on, and I saw a text conversation with her boss, Mark. The language was too familiar, too intimate. They were talking about meeting up, secret plans, and being careful. I froze. My stomach dropped. My heart started pounding. I kept reading, and what I saw made my blood boil. They'd been texting for months, and it wasn't just about work. There were plans for dinners, late-night meetings, and even talk about keeping it discreet because, as Lisa put it, John would freak out if he knew. I couldn't believe it. My wife, the woman I loved, had been lying to my face for years. And Mark, her boss, wasn't just some guy at work, he was the guy she'd been cheating on me with. The worst part, I found out she'd been lying about everything: her supposed hard work, her late nights at the office, her stress. It was all bullshit, just cover stories to hide her affair. The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. How could she do this? How could she sit there and lie to my face, pretending everything was fine? I felt betrayed, humiliated, and honestly like I'd been hit by a freight train. I didn't sleep that night, just replaying everything I'd missed, signs I'd ignored, moments I'd dismissed as her being tired or stressed. Turns out she'd been lying about her feelings, her fidelity, everything. She'd been having sex with her boss, probably for months, and I was just blind to it. That's when I decided I couldn't let this go. I needed answers, and I needed to know just how deep her lies ran. It wasn't just about the affair anymore. It was about the money, too. I found out she'd been secretly siphoning money from our joint savings, about $50, $0 over the past year. She'd been investing in some shady online schemes, claiming it was for our future, but I knew better. She'd been hiding the real reason she was so stressed, so tired, so distant. And then I realized something else. Her boss, Mark, was claiming he owned half our house and demanded $250, $0 from our savings, saying it was his due because of some fake business deal he'd cooked up with Lisa. I felt sick. How could she be so manipulative, so calculated? I was furious, but I knew this was just the beginning. I had to confront her, and I had to do it soon. The day I confronted her, Lisa was her usual bitchy self, smirking, dismissive, like she didn't think I had any right to be upset. I told her I knew everything, and her face twisted into that exaggerated expression she always used when she was trying to act innocent. "John, you're overreacting," she said, crossing her arms. "It's just work stuff. Mark's a good boss, and we're just friends. You're making a big deal out of nothing." I couldn't believe how she lied so effortlessly, how she spun the story like she was the victim. I threw the phone on the table and showed her the messages. Her eyes flickered, but she quickly recovered her bitchy mask. "That's old news, John. You're reading too much into things. Mark and I were just working together. It's not what you think." She gave me that look, like she was the innocent wife and I was the paranoid fool, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I told her I knew about the money she'd stolen, the plans with Mark, everything. That's when she finally snapped. "You do know what you're talking about," she spat. "You think I'd cheat on you. You're imagining things. Mark's just a boss and I was trying to get ahead. You're insecure, John, always have been. You're just jealous because I'm smarter and more successful than you." That was her go-to line: call me insecure, accuse me of being jealous, as if that could justify her lying about everything. I felt a mix of rage and sadness. How could she be so cruel? How could she turn my life into this twisted joke? I decided to dig deeper to get to the bottom of her lies. I started digging through our bank accounts, her emails, her phone, whatever I could get my hands on. I found receipts for secret meetings, hidden transfers, even a private bank account she'd opened under a fake name. It was all there. She'd been planning her escape, or maybe her revenge, for months. I realized she'd been using me as a cover, a fool to keep her life perfect on the surface while she was out screwing around and draining our savings. That's when I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't just walk away and let her keep lying and stealing. My mind raced with possibilities. I knew I had to protect what was mine, our house, our money, our future. But I also knew Lisa was dangerous in her own way. She was manipulative, bitchy, and she'd do anything to save her ass. I'd heard stories of women like her, cheaters who turned the tables, who played innocent until they got caught. I had to be smart, careful. I decided I'd gather evidence, talk to a lawyer, and figure out my next move. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me, not after everything she'd done. The emotional toll was heavy. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and stupid for ever trusting her. I kept replaying the moments when I should have seen the signs, her late nights, her secretive phone calls, the way she'd always dismiss my concerns with that bitchy smile. Now I saw it for what it was, her way of hiding the truth. I was angry at myself for not noticing sooner, but I was angrier at her for lying, for sneaking around, for turning our marriage into a lie. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let her keep screwing me over, not without consequences. That night I sat alone in the dark, trying to process it all. Part of me wanted to just walk away, start over somewhere new, but another part, something darker, wanted revenge. I'd been played for a fool, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it that easily. I had a plan forming, one that would shake her world and settle the score. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew I'd make her regret every lie, every betrayal. I'd take back what was mine, and she'd finally see what it felt like to be on the receiving end of her own game. After that confrontation, I knew I couldn't just sit around and do nothing. I started planning, gathering every piece of evidence I could find, screenshots of texts, bank statements, emails, anything that proved Lisa's lies and her scheme with Mark. I also decided to get a lawyer. I needed someone who knew how to handle cases involving infidelity, hidden assets, and property claims. I wasn't going to let her walk away with half the house or that $250, $0 she and Mark were demanding. I had to protect what was mine. And I had to do it smart. I spent the next few days digging into our finances, tracking every dollar she'd taken, every shady transaction she'd made. Turns out she'd been funneling money into that secret bank account under a fake name for months. I found out she'd been planning her escape, probably with Mark, for a long time. I was furious. How could she be so calculating, so ruthless? It was like she'd been planning her double life all along, just waiting for the right moment to cut loose and take everything she could. Meanwhile, Lisa kept up her act, acting innocent, bitching, blaming me for trust issues, and insisting she was the victim. She'd sit there, acting like I was the crazy one, trying to gaslight me into believing she was just stressed at work or under pressure. I saw through her bullshit. I knew she was lying, scheming, and trying to manipulate her way out of this. I also realized she'd been lying about her affair, not just to me but to herself. She convinced herself she was doing nothing wrong, that her boss was just a friend. Even though I knew better, I started talking to a lawyer, laying out everything I knew. I wanted to be prepared. I told him about the affair, the money she'd stolen, and the threats Mark was making about ownership of the house. That's when he told me about the legal options, how Mark might actually have a claim to part of our property if he could prove he had some kind of ownership stake, and how I could fight to keep our savings. It was a shock to hear that a guy like Mark could threaten to take half our house just because he'd been screwing my wife. But I wasn't going down without a fight. One day, I decided to confront Lisa again, but this time with a plan. I told her I knew everything, the affair, the money, the threats. I told her I'd already talked to a lawyer and was prepared to take her to court if she tried to steal from me or claim ownership of our house. Her bitchy smirk faded for a moment, and I saw the flicker of panic in her eyes. She tried to deny everything again, but I had proof. I handed her a folder with all the evidence I'd collected, screenshots, bank statements, receipts. Her face turned red, and for the first time she looked genuinely scared. She started crying, claiming she was sorry, that she loved me, and that she'd do anything to fix things, but I wasn't buying it. I told her she'd pushed me too far, that her lies had destroyed the trust we once had. I told her I was done being played. I was going to fight for our house, for our savings, and for my dignity. I knew she was desperate now, trying to manipulate her way out of this mess, but I had the upper hand. I'd made my decision. I was going to get a divorce, and I was going to take her to court if necessary. The emotional roller coaster was exhausting. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and furious. I'd loved her once, believed in us, but now I saw her for what she really was, a manipulative, lying bitch who'd used me as a fool for years. I was hurt, yes, but more than that, I was angry. Angry at her, angry at Mark, and angry at myself for not seeing it sooner. I realized I'd wasted years on this relationship, trying to fix something that was already broken. Now I was focused on protecting what was mine and making sure she paid for her lies. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Mark was claiming he owned part of the house, and she was threatening to take our savings. I had to prepare for a fight, legal, financial, emotional. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. Not without a fight. I was done being the fool, and I was ready to take control of my life again. The day I finally decided to take action, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. I had all the evidence I needed, and I was ready to confront her once and for all. I called my lawyer, a guy named Steve who specialized in family law and property disputes. We went over everything in detail: her affair, the hidden money, Mark's threats, and her attempts to manipulate the situation. Steve was clear. We had a strong case to protect the house and our savings, but it wasn't going to be easy. Mark's claims about ownership could complicate things, especially if he could produce some sort of legal document or proof of claim. I decided to be proactive. I sent Lisa a formal notice that I was filing for divorce and that I was taking legal action to protect our assets. I also demanded she return every dollar she'd stolen from our joint account and cease any attempts to claim ownership of the house. Her reaction was classic Lisa. She tried to spin it, act innocent, and act like I was the one overreacting. She said I was taking things too far, that I was ruining everything, and that I'd destroyed our marriage. But I knew better. I knew she'd been lying and scheming behind my back for years, and now I was finally putting a stop to it. In the meantime, I hired a private investigator to look into Mark. Turns out, he'd been involved in shady real estate deals before, and I found some of his previous lawsuits where he tried to claim ownership of properties through dubious means. That was good news. If Mark was trying to claim half our house, I had proof that he was a manipulative con artist, not a legitimate owner. I also learned that Lisa had been secretly paying Mark a hefty monthly consulting fee, which she'd hidden from me. All of this was starting to look like a well-planned scheme to take my house and money. One night, Lisa came home furious. She accused me of ruining her life, crying crocodile tears and begging me to back off. She said she'd do anything to keep the marriage together, that she loved me, and that she hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But I was done listening to her lies. I told her I had all the proof I needed, and if she didn't want to lose everything, she better start cooperating. I made it clear that I was prepared to fight her in court, and that I wasn't going to be the fool anymore. The next step was to file the legal paperwork. I did that myself, with Steve's help. I filed for divorce, demanded full custody of our assets, and requested a court order to freeze her accounts and prevent her from selling or transferring any property until the case was resolved. I also subpoenaed her bank records, her emails, and her phone records to show her scheme to drain our savings and manipulate the situation. I knew she'd try to fight me, but I was ready. I'd already won half the battle by uncovering her lies and gathering evidence. In the midst of all this, Mark's threats grew more aggressive. He started demanding his share of the house, claiming he had investment rights because of some fake agreement he'd made with Lisa. I wasn't buying it. I had legal advice that said he was trying to strong-arm us, and I was prepared to fight him in court if necessary. I also contacted our bank and flagged the suspicious transactions, making sure that any attempt by Mark or Lisa to withdraw or transfer funds would be blocked. I was finally taking control of the situation, and it felt damn good. Emotionally, I was drained. I'd gone from feeling betrayed and humiliated to feeling angry and determined. The betrayal cut deep, but it also fueled my resolve. I realized I'd spent years trusting Lisa, giving her the benefit of the doubt and ignoring the signs. Now I was facing the reality. She'd been lying, cheating, stealing, and scheming behind my back. It was a gut punch, but I knew I had to stand tall and fight. I couldn't let her or Mark get away with this. I had to protect what was mine and make sure they paid for their deception. As I prepared for the court battle ahead, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Lisa's bitchy attitude, her lies, her manipulations, they all pointed to someone who was willing to do anything to get what she wanted. But I was done playing nice. I was ready to take her down, even if it meant exposing her worst secrets and fighting dirty. Because at the end of the day, I knew I deserved better, and I was going to get it. The court date came quicker than I expected, and honestly, I was a mess of nerves and anger. Sitting in that courtroom, I could feel the weight of everything. Years of trust, love, betrayal, and now, a battle for what's rightfully mine. Lisa looked nervous, too, but she tried to play it off with that bitchy smirk she always used when she thought she was in control. Mark wasn't there physically, but his threats and legal claims loomed over everything. He was claiming ownership of half our house, citing some bogus investment deal that I knew was a lie. My lawyer, Steve, laid out all the evidence against her, screenshots of the texts with Mark, bank records showing the secret transfers, her hidden account, and the shady dealings Mark had been involved in. We argued fiercely that Lisa had no legal claim to part of the house, especially since she'd been secretly siphoning money and scheming to get more than her fair share. I felt a surge of confidence knowing I had the truth on my side. Lisa's face twisted with frustration, and she tried to deny everything, but her words sounded hollow and rehearsed. The judge listened carefully, flipping through our evidence, asking pointed questions. I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to piece everything together, trying to decide who was telling the truth. When it was my turn, I laid out everything. How Lisa had lied about her work, cheated on me with Mark, stolen our savings, and schemed to take the house. I told her I'd had enough of her manipulations, and that I was prepared to fight to keep what was mine. Lisa, of course, played the victim card, crying and claiming I was destroying her life, saying she'd made mistakes and begging the court to consider her circumstances. But I knew better. I knew she'd been planning this for months, lying and scheming behind my back. I looked right at her and told the judge that she'd been unfaithful, dishonest, and manipulative, and that I was seeking full custody of our assets and the divorce. The judge took all the evidence into account and finally made a ruling. She declared that Mark had no legitimate claim to half the house, as he couldn't produce any legal proof of ownership, and that Lisa had illegally transferred funds from our joint account. She ordered the immediate freezing of Lisa's assets and set a timetable for the divorce proceedings. The judge also awarded me full custody of our savings and the house, with Lisa to pay back the stolen money plus damages. I felt a huge weight lift off my shoulders, knowing I had fought for what was rightfully mine and that I'd won that battle. But the victory was bittersweet. Lisa was furious, throwing a tantrum in the courtroom, yelling that the system was rigged, that I was a terrible husband, and that she'd destroy me in the end. Mark's threats echoed in my mind. This wasn't over yet. I knew he'd try to find a way to claim something through legal loopholes or shady deals. That's why I made sure to file everything with the court, to make it clear I wouldn't back down. I also arranged for a forensic accountant to scrutinize her financial records further, just to catch any other hidden accounts or assets she might have been hiding. Emotionally, I was battered but also relieved. I'd faced her lies head-on and come out on top, at least for now. I realized how deeply her betrayal had cut, how much I'd trusted her, and how she'd used that trust against me. But I also learned that I was stronger than I thought, strong enough to fight, to stand my ground, and to reclaim my life from someone who had betrayed me so completely. I knew it wouldn't be easy moving forward, especially with Mark still lurking in the background, but I was ready. I'd fought for my future and I was determined to rebuild it, better, stronger, and free of her lies. Now I just had to focus on wrapping everything up, making sure she paid for her schemes, and finally putting this nightmare behind me. The lessons are harsh, but I've learned that sometimes you have to take control, no matter how much it hurts, because in the end, you're the only one who truly has your back. After the court's decision, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The legal battle was finally over, and I had managed to keep what was rightfully mine: our house, our savings, my dignity. Lisa's reaction was predictable. She lost her shit, screaming and crying in the courthouse like a spoiled brat. Mark, of course, tried to make a scene too, claiming he was owed his share. But the judge wasn't having any of it. She ordered her to pay back the stolen money, plus damages, and made it clear that any attempt by Mark to claim ownership of our house would be dismissed unless he had concrete proof. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I'd spent months fighting her lies, her manipulations, her schemes. I had uncovered everything, fought for my rights, and finally I felt some sense of peace. The truth had come out and justice had been served, at least in the eyes of the law. But inside, I knew this wasn't just about the legal victory. It was about reclaiming my life after a betrayal so deep that I'd never thought I'd recover from it. Looking back, I realize how much I learned from this nightmare. Trust is fragile, and once broken, it's almost impossible to rebuild completely. Lisa was never the person I thought she was. She was manipulative, selfish, and willing to lie and cheat her way to get what she wanted. I also learned that I'm stronger than I believed. I fought for myself, for my future, and I refused to be a victim of her schemes. The experience has hardened me, but it's also made me more cautious about who I trust and how I handle my life and money. As I moved on, I cut off all contact with Lisa. I changed my phone number, blocked her on social media, and focused on rebuilding what I'd lost. I started therapy, not just to heal from the emotional scars, but to understand how I'd let her manipulate me for so long. I also took control of my finances, paid off debts, closed the shady accounts she'd hidden, and set strict boundaries for my future. I realized that I'd been naive, but I also saw that I had the power to rebuild my life on my own terms. The house is now fully mine. I refinanced it, got a fresh start, and even bought a new car. I've started dating again, carefully this time, and I'm slowly learning to trust again, but with a much sharper eye. I don't expect perfection, but I do expect honesty. Mark is still out there trying to stir trouble, but I've learned to ignore him. His threats are empty now. I've made it clear I won't be intimidated or manipulated anymore. Most importantly, I've come to accept that some betrayals are so profound they change you forever. But they also teach you. I've learned that I'm capable of handling more than I thought, and I refuse to let someone else's lies define me. I think the biggest lesson is this: you can't control other people's actions, but you can control how you respond. I chose to fight, to stand my ground, and to rebuild from the ashes. That's what I want anyone reading this to. Remember, no matter how deep the betrayal, you have the strength to come out the other side. You just have to be willing to fight for it.